The voice inside your head. Your mind is lying to you. Not all the time, but more often than you think. There's a voice inside your head. Quiet, constant, always there. And most of the time, you trust it. Without questioning, without checking, without realizing, it's not always telling the truth. It tells you you're not ready, that you're not good enough, that you're going to fail, that you shouldn't try, that you should wait, that you should stay where you are. And it sounds convincing. It feels real because it comes from you, from your own mind. But here's the problem. Just because a thought feels real doesn't mean it's true. Because your mind is not designed to make you successful. It's designed to protect you, to keep you safe, to avoid risk, to avoid failure, to avoid discomfort. And to do that, it creates stories, negative ones, worst case scenarios, doubts, fear, and it repeats them again and again until you believe them, until they feel like facts, until they control your decisions. So you stop, you hesitate, you hold back, not because you can't move forward, but because your mind convinced you that you shouldn't. And that's how it traps you, not physically, but mentally. Because once you believe the thought, you act on it. And once you act on it, it becomes your reality, even if it started as a lie. That's the power of your mind. It can create a false reality that feels completely real. And the worst part, you don't even notice it. You don't question it. You just follow it because it feels like you. It sounds like you. It comes from inside you. But that doesn't mean it's right because your mind is biased. It remembers your failures more than your successes. It focuses on what could go wrong instead of what could go right. It exaggerates risk. It minimizes potential. And it does all of that to keep you safe. But safety has a cost. It keeps you small. It keeps you stuck. It keeps you in the same place. Because growth requires risk. It requires discomfort. It requires stepping into the unknown. And your mind hates that. So it fights it with thoughts, with fear, with doubt. And if you don't recognize that, if you don't separate yourself from those thoughts, you lose control. You start living based on fear instead of truth, based on doubt instead of potential, based on what your mind tells you instead of what's actually possible. And that's the trap. Not the situation you're in, not your circumstances, but the way your mind is controlling you without you realizing it. So the first step is awareness, to notice the thoughts, to hear the voice, to recognize when your mind is speaking. Because once you see it, you create distance, distance between you and the thought. And in that space, you have a choice, to believe it or to question it. And that's where your power begins. Not in controlling everything outside, but in controlling what you accept inside. Because the moment you stop believing every thought is the moment your life starts to change. Why your mind creates negative thoughts. Your mind is not trying to destroy you. It's trying to protect you. But the way it protects you is exactly what's holding you back. Because your mind doesn't understand success. It understands survival. It understands safety. It understands avoiding pain. And to do that, it constantly scans for danger. Not just physical danger, but emotional risk, failure, rejection, embarrassment, uncertainty. And when it detects those things, it reacts with negative thoughts, with doubt, with fear. Because from your mind's perspective, those thoughts are useful. They're warnings, signals that say, be careful, don't take that risk, stay where it's safe. And that worked in the past, because thousands of years ago, safety meant survival. Avoiding risk meant staying alive. But now, You're not trying to survive. You're trying to grow. And growth requires the exact opposite: risk, discomfort, uncertainty, things your mind is designed to avoid. So there's a conflict between what you want and what your mind is trying to do. You want progress. Your mind wants safety. You want change. Your mind wants stability. You want to move forward. Your mind wants to stay where it's familiar. And because your mind is louder, because it's constant, because it feels real, it often wins. Not because it's right, but because you don't question it. Because you've been trained to trust it, to follow your thoughts, to believe what you think, even when those thoughts are based on fear, even when they're not true. And over time, that creates a pattern, a habit of negative thinking, where your mind automatically goes to the worst outcome, automatically assumes failure, automatically creates doubt. Not because it's accurate, but because it's consistent, because it's repeating the same process over and over again. And the more it repeats, the more familiar it feels. The more familiar it feels, the more you believe it. And once you believe it, it becomes your reality. You stop trying. You stop taking action. You avoid opportunities. You stay in your comfort zone. Not because you can't do more, but because your mind convinced you that you shouldn't. And that's how it controls you. Not with force, but with repetition, with patterns, with thoughts that feel automatic. But here's what you need to understand. Just because a thought is automatic doesn't mean it's accurate. Just because it feels natural doesn't mean it's true. It just means it's practiced. It's a habit. And habits can be changed, but only if you recognize them, only if you become aware of them, because you can't change what you don't see. And right now, most of your thoughts are happening automatically, without awareness, without questioning, without control. So the goal is not to stop thinking. That's impossible. The goal is to understand your thoughts, to see where they're coming from, to recognize when they're based on fear instead of reality. Because once you do that, you take back control. You stop reacting automatically. You stop believing everything you think. You start questioning, challenging, choosing. And that's where everything shifts. Because now, your mind is not controlling you. You're controlling your mind. Not with force, but with awareness, by understanding, by separating yourself from the thoughts. And that changes everything. Because now, a negative thought is just a thought, not a fact, not a decision, not your reality. And that gives you power, real power, the ability to think without being controlled by your thoughts. And that's the beginning of a completely different life. You believe thoughts that aren't real. You think your thoughts are real. You treat them like facts, like evidence, like truth. But most of the time, they're not. They're just interpretations, assumptions, stories your mind creates. And the problem is, you don't question them. You accept them instantly, without pause, without doubt, without awareness. A thought appears, I'm not good enough, and you believe it. I'm going to fail. You believe it. This won't work. You believe it. And once you believe it, you act accordingly. You hesitate. You stop. You hold back. And suddenly, that thought becomes your reality. Not because it was true, but because you made it true through your actions. That's the illusion. Your mind creates a thought, you believe it, you act on it, and then you think, see, I was right. But you weren't. You just followed the thought, and your behavior matched it, so the outcome matched it. And now it feels like proof, even though it started as a lie. That's how powerful your mind is. It can turn a false thought into a real result just by getting you to believe it. And this happens every day, in small ways, in invisible ways. You avoid opportunities. You stay silent. You don't try. You don't take risks because of thoughts that feel real but aren't. And over time, this creates a pattern of limitation where your life is controlled not by reality, but by your perception of it. And perception is not always accurate because your mind filters everything through past experiences, through fear, through emotion, through bias. So what you think is reality is often just your interpretation of it, not the truth, just a version of it. And if that version is negative, limiting, fear-based, it shapes your life in that direction, even if it's not true. So the real problem is not your situation. It's not your ability. It's not your potential. It's the fact that you believe thoughts without checking them, without asking, is this actually true? Or is this just fear? Because most of the time, it's fear, disguised as logic, disguised as truth, disguised as your own voice. And that's why it's so dangerous, because it feels convincing. It feels like you, but it's not accurate. It's protective, and protection is not the same as truth. So the shift begins here, not by forcing positive thinking, not by ignoring negative thoughts, but by questioning them, challenging them, creating space between you and what your mind is saying. Because in that space, you see clearly. You realize this is just a thought, not a fact, not a command, not reality, just a thought. And that changes everything. Because now you don't have to follow it. You don't have to believe it. You don't have to act on it. You can choose. You can decide. You can move forward even if the thought is there. And that's power. Not the absence of negative thoughts, but the ability to not be controlled by them. Because your thoughts will always exist. But your life is determined by what you choose to believe and what you choose to act on. So the next time a thought appears, don't accept it immediately. Pause, look at it, question it. Because the moment you stop believing everything you think is the moment you start seeing reality clearly. And that's where your control begins. Your mind creates fear before reality. Most of your fear doesn't come from reality. It comes from your mind. Before anything even happens, your mind creates a version of it, a negative version, a worst-case scenario, a story where things go wrong, where you fail, where you get rejected, where everything falls apart. And it feels real. It feels immediate. It feels like something you need to react to. But nothing has happened yet. It's all in your head, a prediction, not a fact. But your body reacts anyway. Your heart rate changes, your focus drops, your confidence disappears, because your brain doesn't know the difference between something that's real and something that's imagined. So when your mind creates fear, your body believes it, and now you feel it, even though nothing has actually happened. And that feeling becomes your decision. You avoid, you delay, you hesitate, you don't take action. Not because you can't, but because your mind made it feel dangerous. And this happens constantly. Before you speak, before you try, before you take a step, your mind runs simulations. What if it goes wrong? What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough? And those thoughts feel like warnings, like something you should listen to. But most of them never happen. They're just possibilities, not probabilities. But your mind treats them as certain, as if failure is guaranteed, as if risk is too high. And that's what keeps you stuck, because you're reacting to imagined fear as if it's real danger. And the more you do that, the stronger that pattern becomes. The faster your mind jumps to fear, the quicker you react, the less you question it, until it feels automatic, until fear becomes your default response. But here's the truth. Fear is not always a signal to stop. Sometimes it's a signal that you're about to grow. Because everything you want exists outside your comfort zone, outside what feels safe, outside what your mind is trying to protect you from. So when you feel fear, it doesn't always mean danger. It often means opportunity. But you've been trained to see it differently, to avoid it, to listen to it, to follow it, without questioning it. And that's what keeps you in the same place, because you're not reacting to reality. You're reacting to imagination, to thoughts that haven't happened, to outcomes that don't exist yet. And that's limiting your life, not your ability, not your potential, just your perception. So the shift begins here, recognizing that fear is often created before reality, that it's not always accurate, that it's not always telling the truth. Because once you see that, you create space, space to pause, space to think, space to choose. Instead of reacting instantly, you observe. You ask, is this actually happening? Or is this just my mind predicting? And most of the time, it's prediction, not reality. And that changes everything, because now you don't have to obey the fear. You don't have to follow it blindly. You can move forward even with it, because courage is not the absence of fear. It's action despite it. And that's where your control is, not in eliminating fear, but not letting it decide your life. Because your mind will always create possibilities, but your future is built on what you choose to do, not what you're afraid might happen. So the next time you feel fear, pause, look at it, understand it, because it might not be real. It might just be your mind trying to keep you safe at the cost of your growth. You are not your thoughts. For a long time, you've believed something without even realizing it. You've believed, I am my thoughts. Whatever you think, you assume that's who you are. If your mind says, I'm not good enough, you feel like you're not. If your mind says, I'm going to fail, you believe it. If your mind fills with doubt, you become doubtful. But here's the truth you've never been taught. You are not your thoughts. You are the one observing them. There's a difference, a big one, because thoughts appear, they come and go, they change, they repeat, they disappear, but you stay. You're the awareness behind them, the one noticing them, the one experiencing them. And once you understand that, everything changes. Because now, a negative thought is not your identity. It's just something passing through your mind, like a cloud passing through the sky. Temporary, not permanent, not defining. But until now, you've been attaching yourself to those thoughts, taking them personally, letting them define how you feel and how you act. So when a negative thought appears, you don't just see it, you become it. And that's where the problem begins. Because now, you're not just thinking negatively, you're living negatively, based on something that's not even real, just a thought. So the shift is simple, but powerful. Stop identifying with every thought. Start observing them instead. Watch them, notice them, but don't become them. Because the moment you create that separation, you gain control, real control. The ability to choose instead of react, the ability to respond instead of follow, the ability to act instead of freeze. Because now your thoughts are no longer commands. They're just information, sometimes useful, sometimes not, sometimes accurate, sometimes completely wrong. And it's your job to decide which ones matter, not your mind. Because your mind produces everything, positive and negative, fear and confidence, doubt and clarity. But you choose what to believe, what you act on, what you give energy to. Because attention is power. And wherever your attention goes, your life follows. So if you give attention to negative thoughts, they grow, they expand, they take control. But if you observe them without feeding them, without reacting to them, they lose power, they pass, they fade. and you stay in control. So the next time your mind speaks, pause. Don't react immediately. Don't believe it instantly. Just notice it, because it's not you. It's just your mind. And you are something more. You are the one in control, the one who decides, the one who moves forward, not based on every thought, but based on what truly matters. And that's where freedom begins. Not when your thoughts disappear, but when they stop controlling you. Because you finally understand, you are not your thoughts. You are the one in charge of them.
Take control or be controlled. At some point, you have to make a decision. Not about your goals, not about your future, but about your mind. Who's in control? You or your thoughts? Because right now, whether you realize it or not, one of them is leading. If you follow every thought, every doubt, every fear, then your mind is in control, and your life reflects that. You hesitate, you delay, you avoid, you stay in your comfort zone. Not because you want to, but because your thoughts are deciding for you, without you even noticing. But the moment you become aware, the moment you start questioning, everything changes. Because now you have a choice: to follow the thought or to override it, to react automatically or to respond consciously. And that's where control begins. Not by stopping your mind, but by deciding what you listen to. Because your mind will always talk. It will always produce thoughts. That never stops. But you don't have to follow everything it says. You don't have to obey every fear. You don't have to believe every doubt. Because not every thought deserves action. And the problem is, you've been acting on all of them, without filtering, without thinking, without asking, is this helping me or holding me back? Because once you start asking that, you take back power. You stop reacting blindly. You start choosing intentionally. And that's the difference between being controlled and being in control. Because control is not about silence. It's not about having no thoughts. It's about awareness. It's about choice. It's about deciding, this thought doesn't serve me. I'm not going to follow this fear. I'm going to act anyway. And that's where your strength shows. Not in what you think, but in what you do. Because action breaks patterns. Action rewrites your mind. Action proves your thoughts wrong, again and again, until your mind starts changing, until it starts trusting you, until it stops controlling you. Because now, you're leading, you're deciding, you're moving forward even when your mind says don't. And that's real power. Because now, your life is not based on automatic thoughts. It's based on conscious decisions. And conscious decisions create real change. So the question is simple. Are you going to keep following your mind, or are you going to take control of it? Because you can't do both. You can't let your thoughts lead and expect your life to change. You have to choose. Control or be controlled. Growth or comfort. Action or hesitation. And that choice is happening right now, in this moment, in every thought you have. Because every time you act, you're deciding who's in control. So decide carefully, because your future depends on it. Train your mind like a weapon. Your mind is not something you control once. It's something you train every single day. Just like your body, just like a skill, just like a weapon. Because right now, your mind is running on habits, old patterns, repeated thoughts, automatic reactions. And those patterns aren't random. They've been trained through repetition, through what you've allowed, through what you've believed, over and over again. So if your mind goes negative, if it jumps to fear, if it creates doubt, it's not because it's broken, it's because it's trained that way. And anything that's trained can be retrained, but only through practice. Not once, not occasionally, but consistently. Because your mind learns through repetition, through what you do again and again. So if you keep reacting to fear, fear becomes stronger. If you keep believing doubt, doubt becomes your default.
If you keep avoiding action, avoidance becomes your habit. But the opposite is also true. If you start challenging thoughts, you build awareness. If you start acting despite fear, you build confidence. If you start choosing discipline, you build control. And slowly, your mind changes. Not instantly, not dramatically, but gradually, through repetition, through consistency, through small actions done over time. And that's where most people fail. They try to change their mind without changing their behavior. They wait to feel ready, to feel confident, to feel motivated before they act. But that's backwards, because feelings follow action, not the other way around. You don't act because you feel confident. You feel confident because you act. You don't control your mind first and then take action. You take action, and that trains your mind. So the real question is not, how do I control my thoughts? The real question is, what am I practicing every day? Because whatever you practice becomes your mind. If you practice hesitation, you become hesitant. If you practice discipline, you become disciplined. If you practice courage, you become confident. And that's how you build control, not by forcing your thoughts, but by training your responses again and again and again until it becomes automatic, until your new patterns replace the old ones, until your mind starts working for you instead of against you. And that's when everything changes. Because now you don't have to fight your thoughts. You've trained them. You've shaped them. You've built a system that supports your growth. And that's real power. Not temporary motivation, not short-term focus, but long-term control, the kind that stays, the kind that builds, the kind that turns your mind into your greatest advantage. So treat your mind like a weapon. Train it, discipline it, refine it. Because if you don't, it will be used against you. But if you do, it will take you further than you ever thought possible.
Master your thoughts. Master your life. Everything in your life starts in your mind. Before any action, before any result, before any change, there is a thought. And that thought shapes what you do next. If your thoughts are negative, your actions become limited. If your thoughts are fearful, your decisions become safe. If your thoughts are doubtful, your progress slows down. Not because of your ability, but because of your mindset. Because your mind is the filter, the lens through which you see everything. And if that lens is distorted, everything looks harder than it actually is. Everything feels more dangerous than it really is. Everything seems impossible, even when it's not. And that's why mastering your thoughts is mastering your life. Because when you change how you think, you change how you act. And when you change how you act, you change your results. But mastery doesn't mean control over every thought. That's not possible. Your mind will always produce thoughts, good and bad, positive and negative, fearful and confident. That never stops. So mastery is not about stopping thoughts. It's about choosing them, choosing what to focus on, choosing what to believe, choosing what to act on. Because not every thought deserves your attention. Not every thought deserves your energy. And the moment you understand that, you stop reacting automatically. You start directing your mind. You start guiding your focus. And that's where control becomes power. Because now, you're not controlled by randomness. You're not driven by fear. You're not limited by doubt. You're choosing your direction, thought by thought, decision by decision. And that builds momentum, a different kind of momentum, not based on motivation, but based on clarity, on awareness, on control. Because when your thoughts are aligned, your actions become stronger, your focus becomes sharper, your energy becomes more directed, and everything starts to move forward, not faster, but more efficiently, more intentionally, more powerfully. And that's what most people are missing. Not talent, not opportunity, not potential, just control. Control over what they think, control over what they focus on, control over what they allow into their mind. Because your environment affects your thoughts. What you watch, what you listen to, what you repeat, what you expose yourself to every day, all of it shapes your mind.
and your mind shapes your life. So if you want to master your life, start with your thoughts, start with your awareness, start with your focus. Because once you control that, everything else becomes easier. Not easy, but easier. Because now you're not fighting yourself, you're working with yourself. And that's the difference between struggle and progress, between confusion and clarity, between being stuck and moving forward. So don't underestimate your thoughts. Don't ignore them. Don't let them run uncontrolled, because they're building your life every single day, whether you realize it or not. So take control, choose wisely, focus intentionally, because the moment you master your thoughts is the moment you start mastering your life.
Silence your mind. Amplify your focus. Your mind is loud, constantly. Thought after thought, noise after noise, ideas, worries, memories, predictions, all running at the same time. And most of it is unnecessary, not useful, not important, just noise. But you've gotten used to it. So used to it that silence feels uncomfortable. That stillness feels strange. That focus feels difficult. Because your mind is always active, always moving, always pulling your attention in different directions. And that's the problem. Not your lack of ability, not your lack of discipline, but your lack of focus. Because focus is not about doing more. It's about doing less. Less noise, less distraction, less unnecessary thinking. Because the more your mind is filled, the less space you have for clarity, the less space you have for decisions, the less space you have for action. And that's why you feel stuck. Not because you don't know what to do, but because your mind is too crowded to do it. Too many thoughts, too many distractions, too many directions, and no clear focus. So the solution is not to think more, it's to think less, to reduce the noise, to quiet the mind, to create space. Because in that space, clarity appears, direction becomes clear, decisions become easier, and action becomes natural. But silence doesn't come automatically. You have to create it intentionally by removing distractions, by limiting what you consume, by controlling where your attention goes. Because attention is everything. Where you focus, your energy follows. And where your energy goes, your results come from. So if your attention is scattered, your results will be scattered. If your attention is focused, your results will be powerful. And that's the difference. Not talent, not luck, just focus. The ability to direct your mind and keep it there without getting pulled away, without reacting to every thought, without following every distraction. And that's hard because your mind will resist. It will try to pull you back to distraction, to noise, to comfort. But every time you bring it back, you train it, you strengthen it, you build control. And slowly, your mind becomes quieter, not empty, but controlled, not silent, but focused. And that's where power comes from, not from doing everything, but from doing one thing with full attention. Because when your mind is clear, your actions become sharp, your decisions become strong, your progress becomes real. And that's what you need. Not more thoughts, not more ideas, just more focus. So if you want to move forward, if you want to grow, if you want to take control, start here. Silence the noise, reduce the distractions, focus your mind. Because the quieter your mind becomes, the louder your results will be. Control your mind, control your destiny. At the end of everything, after all the thoughts, all the doubts, all the fear your mind creates, there's one truth that remains. Your life is shaped by what you allow in your mind, not by your situation, not by your past, not by your circumstances, but by your thoughts. Because every action you take starts with a thought. Every decision you make comes from your mind. And if your mind is uncontrolled, your life becomes unpredictable,
reactive, limited. But when you take control of your mind, everything changes. Not instantly, not magically, but gradually, powerfully. Because now you're no longer reacting, you're choosing. You're no longer following fear, you're acting despite it. You're no longer controlled by doubt, you're moving beyond it. And that's where your destiny begins to shift. Because destiny is not something given, it's something created through choices, through actions, through what you do consistently. And all of that starts in your mind. So if your mind is full of fear, your life reflects fear. If your mind is full of doubt, your life reflects hesitation. But if your mind is focused, clear, disciplined, your life reflects growth, progress, control. And that's the difference. Not external factors, not luck, just internal control. Because the world outside will always be unpredictable. There will always be challenges, always be uncertainty, always be pressure. But the one thing you can control is how you think, how you respond, how you act. And that's enough, more than enough. Because once you master that, nothing else can truly stop you. Not fear, not doubt, not failure. Because you understand something most people don't, that your mind is the source of everything. The source of your strength, the source of your weakness, the source of your limitation, and your potential. And now, you're no longer unaware. You're no longer controlled. You see it clearly. You understand it. And that gives you power. The power to choose differently. The power to act differently. The power to become different. Because you're not waiting for change anymore. You're creating it. Thought by thought, action by action, decision by decision. And that's how destiny is built. Not in one moment, but in every moment. So if you take one thing from all of this, let it be this. Don't believe everything you think. Question it, challenge it, control it. Because your mind will always speak, but you decide whether it leads you or limits you. And once you take control of that, there's nothing left to stop you. Because you're no longer fighting your mind, you're using it. And that changes everything. Because now, your thoughts are not your weakness, they're your weapon. And your destiny is no longer random, it's in your control.